Hello, it's Len from Straight Talk from the Homeland. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here in iconic Singapore attending a UN meeting, but I haven't forgotten the very fluid situation back in Armenia. Singaporeans call their city-state the little red dot, but it's a great example of a small nation achieving big when people act together with vision and purpose. Big thank you to the more than 18,000 who viewed my vlog on the so-called peace deal, which generated more than 250 comments. So let's provide an update and hopefully some clear answers to the many questions.
Let me be quite clear. I'm very supportive of peace initiatives. We've seen with our own eyes the results of the horrific 2020 war, the invasions of Armenia by Azerbaijani head choppers, and the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, formerly known as Nagorno-Karabakh. That's why I presented fair and balanced win-win peace plan initiatives to try to help resolve the conflict with Azerbaijan, and also for Palestine. Of course, I'm just an ordinary person, so those ideas were ignored by the various authorities, but they are linked in the description. Having said that, I should be clear about the peace deal or Washington Declaration. It's not a peace agreement, as it's not binding nor ratified. The document wasn't even signed, despite the lie we see in media like this article. It's part of political theatre, a circus designed to fool the public. For those still unaware of what the so-called Trump route in Armenia is, it's an American initiative to lease land in southern Armenia so that a US contractor can facilitate the transit of Turks and Azerbaijanis. No, it's not a corridor, which insinuates that territory is given away. And yes, transit also means the movement of military weapons that could be used against Armenia, given that Baku's dictator needs an enemy to distract his people from the grinding oppression and corruption that ranks Azerbaijan as being the North Korea of the Caucasus. I called the Crossroads of Peace initiative naive because Azerbaijan will never accept a transport solution that benefits and strengthens Armenia. Nor will there be any reciprocity or safety for Armenians to travel through Azerbaijan. The Trump route will probably turn a positive but naive crossroads of peace concept into a crossroads of conflict, for reasons I'll discuss later. Armenia is being used as a pawn by big power politics once again, and for all this risk, there doesn't appear to be any benefit for Armenia itself. Armenian citizens should ask their government to answer these questions. How is it legally possible to lease sovereign territory to a foreign state with its own armed security? And how is a route able to be unhindered for Azerbaijanis, taught state-sanctioned racial hatred against Armenians since childhood, but also remain under Armenian sovereignty? If the government answers that the route will be unhindered because Armenians will be using electronic systems to check and monitor people and vehicles, then the next question should be, what's the purpose of this surveillance? If it's really unhindered and Armenia is never going to intervene or stop an undesirable situation? And do you think Azerbaijanis and Turks will really consent to any form of electronic checking or surveillance, even unobtrusive, especially for military movements? The reason why they probably won't answer is because they don't know how it's possible to have border control, customs, and immigration, as they've stated, while somehow meeting the Azeri demand for no Armenian blockages. They're likely to defer to a solution from a technical committee, But just like the failed border demarcation process, it'll fail, as they've perceived an impossible to solve scenario. Worse still, it's a Trojan horse danger for Armenia. Armenians remember the creeping pressure on the indigenous Christians of Artsakh, who were forced at gunpoint to flee their ancient homeland. They recall the incremental measures imposed by Azerbaijan, starting from simple environmental protests to a full starvation blockade, now copied by Azerbaijan's genocidal ally Israel. Having been promised unhindered access in this Trojan horse deal, history shows that Azerbaijan will make an excuse to claim that they need to control the area as a true corridor. And is the US a reliable partner to provide security when it has no army in the area? That segues to a key point I asked before. What's in it for the US? The answer is nothing. Quite ironic coming from this America First president. But it's strategically important for warmongers who support Israel's expansionist plans via Syria's so-called American-controlled David's Corridor. It's also obviously a foolish attempt by Western interests to poke the bear by using economic levers to further isolate Russia from a land connection to Iran and the possibility of opening up a second front against Russia. Tehran knows this, is all about encircling Iran and placing Israeli agents on Iran's border, no matter what assurances are given. Is Iran's reaction surprising? Did the US accept Soviet missiles in Cuba? In some ways, the direct threat to Iran is worse than the events that precipitated the war in Ukraine. For those viewers unfamiliar with our region, they might ask why Israel would supply majority Muslim Azerbaijan with weapons to harm tens of thousands of Christian Armenians. Well, Israel chose to support a dictatorship instead of democratic Armenia, so no questions would be asked by the public when it then based agents in Azerbaijan to attack Iran. That's why Iran and Russia were foolish supporting Azerbaijan in 2020, because both are now threatened by American and Israeli interests. Looking at the wider geopolitical and geoeconomic issues, control of this vital area near Armenia by NATO-aligned Turkey and Pakistan-aligned Azerbaijan would threaten vital trade routes being built by China from East Asia and India from South Asia to Europe. Moreover, the realization of the pan-Turkic dream, if these lands are connected via Armenia, would pose a real threat to the territorial integrity of Iran, Russia, and China. So, does anyone genuinely think that this is about peace building for Armenia and Azerbaijan? It should be clear that, despite political assurances, the Trump route is far more likely to lead to conflict rather than peace, given that if Iran and Russia do nothing, it's likely to be an existential threat to their nations. In any case, no one can talk about genuine peace if key issues such as the return of Armenian hostages, the removal of invading Azerbaijani soldiers, the right of return to Artsakh, and justice for war crimes and genocide by Azerbaijanis are deliberately avoided. Finally, it's clear that Azerbaijan has no genuine intent for peace, as it continues to arm itself for another war with Christian Armenia, and it demands ridiculous changes to Armenia's constitution, while agreeing in Washington, D.C. not to interfere in Armenia's internal affairs. Yet, who's asking about amending the Azerbaijani Constitution? It's based on the fake, self-declared, and unrecognised Azerbaijan Democratic Republic 1918 to 20, which claimed part of Armenia's and even Georgia's territory. In conclusion, Armenia mustn't rely solely on an unreliable and self-interested West, as we see that it doesn't really value human rights with what's going on in Palestine, and there's no possibility that it can offer full security guarantees. The Trump route will be spun by politicians as being about peace and transport. In reality, people who understand the bigger picture know that the public are being played as pawns. This is really about the projection of American and Israeli power at the expense of the BRICS nations, in particular Iran, Russia, India, and China. Moreover, the Trump Trojan Horse is likely to lead to conflict, not peace. Azerbaijan now has an excuse to incrementally demand more control with its foot in the door. Armenia lies in Asia, although many Armenians don't seem to know which continent they live on. The Homeland's future should be as a bridge between the West and East, like Switzerland, Oman, and Singapore have done. Peace cannot come from a poorly considered plan that uses Armenia as a pawn and which are an existential threat to our most important neighbour, Iran, or which threaten the trade and territorial integrity of Russia and rising powers China and India with the Trojan Horse. That's really a crossroads of conflict. This is Len from Straight Talk from the Homeland. Please like, share, and subscribe so others can receive this information.